Private Joran Velis was supposed to be calibrating the new long-range transport beacon in the rear logistics tent. Just another grease monkey chore in the endless, sun-baked monotony of the arid sector war. He wasn't even supposed to touch the main console. That was Lieutenant Darrow's job. But Darrow was off flirting with a medic, and the unit kept glitching, blinking red like a dying firefly. Joran, a wiry man with sun-bleached hair and a habit of chewing synth gum until it lost all flavor, leaned over the controls, squinted at the blinking symbols, and, thinking he was resetting the targeting matrix, jabbed a button labeled with a swirling glyph that looked suspiciously like a coffee stain. The console didn't reset. It whined. Then the air around him ripped. One moment, Joran was ankle-deep in red dust under a twin-sun sky that shimmered like molten brass. The next, he was knee-deep in violet sand under 3 blood-orange moons, surrounded by the acrid stink of ionized plasma and the screams of creatures whose voices sounded like crystal shattering underfoot. Around him, chaos unfolded in slow motion and deafening thunder. Towering insectoid war machines scuttled across dunes like mechanical scorpions, spitting lances of blue fire. Alien soldiers in chitinous armor fell in heaps, and amid it all strode figures of impossible grace. Tall, humanoid warriors with skin like twilight amethyst, hair white as bone, clad in burnished golden armor that caught the moonlight like liquid flame. Joran barely had time to curse before a blast cratered the ground where he'd blinked into existence. Instinct took over. He dove behind a half-buried wreck of a hoverbike, fumbled for his sidearm, thankfully still holstered, and scanned the battlefield like a man waking into someone else's nightmare. He should have died within seconds. He knew that. A lone human in enemy territory, unarmed save for a pistol that fired bullets as useful as spit against armored behemoths. But fate, it seemed, had a sense of humor, and possibly a soft spot for idiots who pressed the wrong button. Before the nearest insectoid drone could swivel its plasma cannon toward him, a streak of gold and purple shot passed like a comet. She moved like wind given form, leaping, spinning, slashing with a curved energy blade that hummed like a storm trapped in glass. Her armor gleamed even in the gloom, etched with spiraling runes that pulsed faintly with inner light. Her eyes, wide and luminous as twin opals, locked onto Joran for half a heartbeat. Confused, wary, but not hostile. Then she yanked him up by the collar of his uniform like he weighed nothing and dragged him behind a crumbling obsidian spire just as the drone unleashed a volley that turned the hoverbike into vapor. "You're not supposed to be here," she hissed, her voice melodic but edged with steel. Up close, her features were sharp yet gentle. High cheekbones, a narrow chin, lips slightly parted in disbelief. Her white hair, threaded with tiny golden beads, whipped around her face in the desert wind. "Human," she added, as if tasting the word for the first time. Why would a human press the void recall glyph? Joran, still tasting dust and adrenaline, managed a shaky grin. Thought it said coffee. Bad translation. She blinked. Once, twice. Then, astonishingly, a laugh escaped her, light, surprised, like wind chimes in a storm. "You pressed the sacred recall sigil, thinking it meant coffee?" She shook her head, but her grip on his arm loosened. "I am Vela of the Azure Fangs, warlord of the 3rd Crescent Legion, and you, human, are either the bravest fool or the luckiest corpse I've ever met." What followed was less a rescue and more a whirlwind. Vela didn't ask questions. She thrust a scavenged pulse rifle into Joran's hands, barked a single command, "Stay alive," and plunged back into the fray. To his own shock, Joran didn't freeze. He ran, ducked, fired. His bullets did little against heavy armor, but they distracted, disrupted, bought Vela the split-second openings she needed. He learned fast. Shoot the joints, target the glowing vents, never stand still. And through it all, Vela fought like a goddess carved from storm and starlight. She danced through enemy fire, her golden armor deflecting bolts that would have gutted a tank, her blade weaving arcs of destruction that left trails of ionized air. Yet every few minutes she'd glance back, checking if he still breathed, still moved. Not out of duty, Joran realized later. Out of something softer, something he couldn't name. By dawn, when the largest of the insectoid war machines lay smoldering in a crater of its own making and the surviving drones retreated into the dunes like skittering ghosts, the battlefield fell quiet except for the moan of the wind and the crackle of dying fires. Joran slumped against a boulder, his uniform torn, his face streaked with soot and alien blood that shimmered faintly pink. Vela approached, her armor scuffed but unbroken, her white hair matted with sand and sweat. She looked exhausted, but her eyes still held that same unreadable intensity. "You fight oddly," she said, crouching beside him. "No discipline, no form, but you never ran." "Didn't have anywhere to run to," Joran admitted, offering his canteen. She took it, sipped, then handed it back with a tilt of her head that might have been gratitude. "Besides, you looked like you could use the help." "I could have handled it," she said, but there was no edge in her voice. Then softer, "But I'm glad you didn't run." They sat in silence as the twin suns crested the horizon, painting the violet sands in hues of rose and gold. Joran learned that this desert, called the Shattered Expanse, was not enemy territory at all. The insectoids were interdimensional raiders, breaching through unstable rifts, sowing chaos across multiple worlds. Vela's people, the Kalari, had been fighting them for decades. The Void Recall glyph Joran had pressed was an emergency summoning rune, used only by Kalari commanders to pull allies across dimensional folds in dire need. No one had ever summoned a human before. No one had even known humans could be summoned. "You have no war here," Vela said, watching his face. "Your world is not on our maps. Your species. We thought you were myth." "Guess we're both full of surprises," Joran replied, flexing a blistered hand. Days passed. Vela's scouts scoured the dunes for a rift stable enough to send him home. Meanwhile, Joran helped tend the wounded, patched armor, and, much to the amusement of the Kalari soldiers, tried to cook field rations on a portable stove that kept shorting out. He made terrible jokes. He mimicked their ceremonial war chants with ridiculous enthusiasm. And slowly, something shifted in the camp. The warriors who'd once eyed him with suspicion now clapped him on the shoulder, offered him dried sky fruit, taught him how to sharpen a plasma blade. And Vela began seeking him out during the quiet watches of night. They'd sit atop a ruined watchtower, sharing stories. She spoke of her childhood in the floating citadels of Kalos, of the weight of command, of how her people were seen as relics in a galaxy racing toward mechanization. He told her of Earth, of oceans that stretched forever, of cities that glowed like constellations, of his little sister who wanted to be a botanist on Mars. "You speak of your world with such tenderness," Vela murmured one evening, her fingers tracing the rim of a ceramic cup he'd whittled from scrap metal. "It makes me ache." "Why?" Joran asked. "Because I've never known a place worth missing," she said quietly. "Our wars have taken everything, even our stories." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just sat closer. Not touching, not yet, but close enough that their shoulders almost brushed in the cold desert air. When the rift finally opened, a shimmering vertical tear in reality humming with unstable energy, Joran felt a pang sharper than any shrapnel wound. The Kalari commander, a stern elder with 4 golden braids woven into his beard, presented him with a ceremonial dagger forged from meteoric iron. "For your courage, human," he intoned. "You stood where others would have fled. You are blood brother to the Azure Fangs." But it was Vela who stepped forward last. She didn't speak. Instead, she reached up and unpinned a single golden bead from her hair, a bead etched with the sigil of her house. She pressed it into his palm. Her fingers lingered. "Go home, Joran Velis," she said. "Live your gentle life." And then the rift pulled him back. He rematerialized in the exact spot he'd vanished from, right beside the still-blinking console in the logistics tent. Darrow hadn't even noticed he was gone. "Hey, you fixed that yet?" the lieutenant called from across the tent, still flirting. Joran didn't answer. He just stared at his palm, where the golden bead pulsed faintly, warm as a heartbeat. He reported the incident as a system malfunction, a momentary glitch. No one believed him, except, strangely, General Ryland, a grizzled veteran with a cybernetic eye who'd fought in 3 interspecies conflicts. Ryland listened to Joran's rambling account, studied the bead, and then nodded slowly. "Kalari," he said. "Rare. Proud. If they gave you that, you did something right." 2 weeks later, Joran was called to the Grand Command Hall, a cavernous dome of polished steel and hollow panels where medals were pinned and wars were declared. He expected a reprimand. Instead, he found General Ryland, flanked by dignitaries from 6 allied species, waiting with a velvet pillow bearing a medal unlike any he'd ever seen. A disk of interwoven silver and gold, shaped like a spiral galaxy, with a single violet gem at its center. "For extraordinary valor beyond the known frontier," Ryland announced, pinning it to Joran's chest. "And for forging a bond where none existed before." The crowd applauded. Joran stood stiffly, the metal cold against his skin. But his mind was elsewhere. on violet sands, white hair, and eyes like opals in moonlight. He didn't know she was watching. From a high balcony veiled in shadow, Vela stood flanked by 2 Kalari honor guards. She'd petitioned the High Conclave to cross the dimensional veil, not as a warrior, but as an envoy, as something new, something unprecedented. Her people had scoffed at first. A warlord, chasing a human? Absurd. But then reports came in of rifts stabilizing, of insectoid incursions halting along the expanse. Some whispered it was because a human had stood beside a Kalari and refused to run. Others said it was because something old had softened in Vela's heart. Now, seeing him below, his sunburnt face, his awkward salute, the metal gleaming on his chest, she allowed herself a small smile. He looked exactly as she remembered, a little cleaner, a little more lost. As the ceremony ended, Joran turned to leave, and froze. There she was, descending the marble steps in full ceremonial regalia. Golden armor polished to brilliance, white hair cascading like a waterfall of silver, a cloak of deep violet velvet swirling around her boots. The crowd parted in stunned silence. Even General Ryland looked shocked. Vela stopped before Joran. She didn't salute, didn't bow. She simply looked at him, her opal eyes holding his with an intensity that made his breath catch. "You left something behind," she said, her voice carrying just loud enough for him to hear. "What?" he whispered. "My bead," she said, and then, before the entire command assembly, she reached into the pouch at her belt and pulled out a second bead, identical to the one he still carried. "Yours was the left. This is the right. Together, they open the gate between our worlds." Joran stared. You came back?" "I came forward," she corrected gently. "There is a difference." And then, with the entire hall watching, she did something no Kalari warlord had done in centuries. She took his hand. Not in ceremony, not in command, but in something softer, something braver. "Your people do not know mine," she said. "But they will. And I would like to know your oceans, your cities, your sister who dreams of Martian flowers." Joran's throat tightened. He'd been to hell and back because of a wrong button press. He'd faced nightmares made of chitin and plasma. But this quiet offer, this impossible hand in his, this terrified him more than any battlefield ever had. "So, what happens now?" he managed. Vela's lips curved into the faintest smile, the kind that hinted at storms weathered and sunrises yet unseen. "Now," she said, "you show me what coffee really tastes like." Around them, the future began to unfold. Not in treaties or telegrams, but in the space between 2 hands clasped in a hall full of stunned silence, under a ceiling that glowed like Earth's forgotten stars. The coffee was terrible. Not because Joran had botched it, though he'd fumbled with the mess hall machine like a man defusing a bomb, but because Vela's people metabolized caffeine like poison. One sip, and her opal eyes dilated wildly. Her golden skin flushed violet with heat, and she nearly collapsed the reinforced titanium table with a single slap of her palm. "Your coffee is a biological weapon," she gasped between manic giggles, clutching her chest as if her heart might burst through her armor. Around them, human soldiers burst into laughter, some recording the moment on wrist comms. Joran, mortified and amused in equal measure, handed her a canteen of water. She drank it greedily, then glared at him with mock betrayal. "Back on Kalos," she panted. "We drink nectar distilled from moon blooms. It enhances focus, soothes the nerves, and sings to the soul." "Sounds fancy," Joran said, still grinning. "I'll stick with my rocket fuel." But that moment, ridiculous, human, utterly unceremonious, broke something open between them. Vela wasn't just an envoy anymore. She was here, living, trying. And the humans, wary at first, began to see past her alien grace to the dry wit beneath. The way she challenged officers during strategy drills, the quiet compassion she showed wounded recruits in the medbay. She didn't just observe Earth's military. She engaged with it. And Joran found himself not just her guide, but her defender, translator, and, increasingly, her confidant. Weeks passed. A fragile peace settled over the arid sector as the interdimensional rifts stabilized, thanks to joint Kalari human monitoring stations. Vela and Joran spent their off hours walking perimeter fences, watching twin sunsets bleed into the horizon, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about the Kalari belief that souls were woven from starlight and memory. He told her about his childhood dog, Rusty, who dug holes in the backyard and how he still missed him 20 years later. She listened like every word was a treasure. Then came the transmission. It crackled through secure channels one midnight, coded in Kalari High script, an emergency broadcast from the Azure Fang's central citadel. Vela's blood ran cold as she listened. Her younger sister, Lyra, had led a scouting party into the northern dunes of the Shattered Expanse and vanished. Only one survivor returned, half dead, babbling about ghost ships and silent fire. The Conclave was declaring the mission lost. But Vela knew better. Lyra wasn't reckless. She wouldn't have strayed beyond sensor range without reason. "I have to go back," Vela told Joran the next morning, her voice low, her armor already packed. "You can't," he said. "The rifts are unstable. The last jump nearly fried your neural pathways. You told me yourself." "I don't care." Her eyes burned. "She's all I have left of my bloodline. Our parents died in the Chitin Wars. If I lose her..." Joran didn't argue. He just nodded. "Then I'm coming with you." "No," she snapped. "This is Kalari business. Your world needs you here." "My world," he said gently, "can wait a few days. And you? You shouldn't go alone." She wanted to refuse. Protocol demanded it. But the truth was, she needed him. Not for his combat skills, though those had proven invaluable, but for his clarity, his stubborn refusal to accept despair. So she relented. General Ryland surprisingly approved the mission on one condition. "Bring back intel," he said, placing a compact dimensional stabilizer in Joran's hand. "And if you find something unusual, don't touch it." They jumped through a newly calibrated rift beneath Earth's moon, emerging not on the familiar violet sands, but in a place that made even Vela stumble backward in dread. The northern dunes were gone. In their place yawned a blackened crater, miles wide, where the sand had fused into glassy obsidian. At its center floated 3 ships, sleek, obsidian black, shaped like inverted tears, humming with a silence so deep it vibrated in the bones. No markings, no hatches, just smooth, seamless void metal. And around them, drifting like ghosts, were dozens of Kalari warriors. Alive, but motionless, eyes open, unblinking, caught in some kind of temporal stasis. "Lyra," Vela whispered, spotting her sister's golden armor near the crater's edge. She rushed forward, but Joran grabbed her arm. "Wait," he said. "Look." The sand beneath the ships wasn't just scorched. It was erased. Time itself seemed frayed here. A rock thrown into the crater didn't fall. It hovered, then dissolved into shimmering particles. The air tasted metallic, wrong. Then, from the largest ship, a voice echoed, not through sound, but directly into their minds. "Calm, ancient, hungry. You have returned, child of starlight." Vela stiffened. "That's impossible." That's the old tongue, the language of the first void singers. "They vanished eons ago." "We did not vanish," the voice replied. "We evolved, and now we harvest." Suddenly, the stasis warriors turned in unison. Their eyes, once luminous, were now black pits. They raised their blades, not with malice, but with eerie precision. Controlled, puppeteered. "Run!" Joran yelled, shoving Vela behind him as the first wave lunged. What followed was a desperate dance through a nightmare landscape. The Void Singers' ships projected fields that distorted gravity, bent light, and scrambled neural signals. Joran's rifle jammed. Vela's plasma blade flickered and died. They fought with fists, rocks, desperation. Joran took a gash across his ribs, shielding Vela from a stasis warrior's blow. She, in turn, used her last energy cell to trigger a sandstorm, buying them seconds to dive into a fissure in the obsidian plain. In the dark, bleeding and breathless, Vela pressed her forehead to his. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've led you to your death." "You haven't," he said, wincing as he tied a tourniquet from his torn sleeve. "Because we're not dead yet." Then he remembered Ryland's warning, "Don't touch it," but also the stabilizer in his pocket. He pulled it out. "What if we don't fight them? What if we break their field?" Vela's eyes widened. "The stabilizer emits a harmonic resonance. If we sync it to Kalari soul frequency, the frequency your people use in meditation," Joran finished. "The one you hummed that night on the watchtower." She nodded fiercely. Working together, bleeding and exhausted, they reprogrammed the device, using Vela's neural implant as a tuner. As the stasis warriors closed in, claws scraping stone, Joran activated the stabilizer. A pure, clear tone erupted, not loud, but deep, vibrating through the earth, the air, the very fabric of space. The obsidian ships shuddered. The stasis warriors froze, then collapsed, freed. The black ships cracked like eggshells, revealing not pilots, but hollow cores pulsing with stolen memories, stolen time. And inside the largest core, Lyra, curled in fetal sleep, her white hair glowing faintly. Vela rushed to her, weeping as she cradled her sister. But as the ships crumbled into dust, a new rift tore open above them. Not golden, not stable, but jagged, screaming with raw entropy. From it poured not warriors, but refugees, hundreds of them. Kalari, yes, but also species Joran had never seen. Winged amphibians, crystalline sentients, moth-like beings with too many eyes, all fleeing something worse. The Void Singers weren't harvesting warriors, Vela realized, horror dawning. They were collecting entire civilizations, preserving them in time cages, draining their timelines to fuel their immortality. And now, with their core destroyed, those timelines were collapsing. The refugees were falling through the cracks of reality, scattered across dimensions with no home to return to. Back on Earth, the consequences unfolded faster than anyone predicted. The rifts didn't close, they multiplied. One opened over Geneva, depositing a city of floating gardens. Another over Mars Colony Theta, disgorging a herd of six-legged grazers that chewed through solar panels like grass. Panic spread. Governments demanded answers. Some called the Kalari invaders. Others blamed Joran for breaking the walls between worlds. General Ryland stood before the unified Earth Council, Vela and Joran at his side. "This isn't invasion," he said, voice booming through the chamber. "It's refuge, and if we turn them away, we become no better than the things that hunted them." But not everyone agreed. A shadow faction, led by Admiral Corvus, a hawk-eyed traditionalist who'd long distrusted alien alliances, declared emergency protocols. "Contain the breach," he ordered. "Quarantine all non-human entities, including the Kalari envoy." Before dawn, armored transports surrounded the diplomatic compound. Vela, still nursing Joran's wounds, looked out the window as floodlights cut through the desert night. "They see me as the cause," she said softly. "Not the cure." Joran stood beside her, jaw set. "Then we give them a reason to see you differently." He contacted Lyra, now recovering, her mind scarred but her spirit unbroken, who'd been quietly mapping the refugee signals with Kalari tech smuggled through micro-rifts. Together, they uncovered something staggering. The refugees weren't random. They were connected. Their timelines had been severed from a single nexus point, an ancient world called Ilithia, the cradle of interdimensional travel, now devoured by the Void Singers. And Earth, by sheer cosmic accident, sat at the new nexus. "We don't just have refugees," Joran realized. "We have the seeds of a new alliance, a new future." But Corvus wasn't listening. His troops stormed the compound at 0300 hours. What should have been a swift arrest turned into a standoff when Vela refused to go quietly. Not out of defiance, but because, in that moment, she felt a pulse through the golden beads still tied around Joran's wrist. A signal. From the refugee ships orbiting Mars. From the gardens floating over Geneva. From 1,000 scattered souls whispering the same word in 100 tongues. "Leader." She stepped onto the balcony, unarmed, her white hair catching the moonlight, and raised her hands. Not in surrender, but in offering. "I am Vela of the Azure Fangs," she called to the armored soldiers below. "I did not come to conquer. I came to ask. And I ask you now, will you help us rebuild what was lost? Or will you let fear burn your future before it's born?" Silence. Then, from the back of the crowd, a single soldier lowered his rifle. Then another. Then another. Corvus, furious, ordered them to fire. But the troops refused. In the days that followed, Earth changed. Not overnight, not without resistance, but irrevocably. Refugee enclaves became cultural districts. Joint defense pacts formed. Scientists and mystics worked side by side to heal the rifts, not seal them. And at the heart of it all stood Joran and Vela. Not as lovers, not yet, but as partners in something larger than either of them. Then came the day Lyra approached them with trembling hands and a small, glowing orb. "It's a seed," she said. "From Ilithia, the last one. It needs a world with strong emotional resonance to take root. A place where hope still lives." They planted it in the arid sector, where Joran had first arrived, where two worlds had first touched. Within hours, a tree sprouted, its bark silver, its leaves shifting between violet and green, its roots humming with the songs of 1,000 lost worlds. And from its branches, tiny rifts bloomed like flowers. Not chaotic, not dangerous, but bridges. Safe passages. Healing wounds. People came from across the galaxy to see it, to touch it, to remember. And one evening, as the twin suns set and the tree glowed like a second moon, Vela turned to Joran. "You once asked me what happens now," she said. I know." She took his hand and placed it over her heart. A Kalari gesture of ultimate trust, of soul binding. "My people believe that when two starlight weavers choose each other, their threads intertwine forever. Not out of duty, not out of war, but because their light shines brighter together." Joran, who'd faced insectoid hordes and time-eating void gods without flinching, felt his knees go weak. "Are you asking me to marry you?" She laughed. The same wind chime laugh he'd first heard in Hellfire and Sand. "I'm asking you to build a home with me, not on Kalos, not on Earth, but between them, where the tree grows." And as the first stars blinked awake above the singing leaves, Joran Velis, the man who pressed the wrong button, knew he'd finally pressed the right one. Not with his finger, but with his heart. The wedding wasn't held in a grand palace or beneath alien constellations. It took place under the Elythian tree, its silver branches arching like cathedral ribs over the arid sector sands, now softened by patches of iridescent moss and flowering vines that glowed faintly at dusk. The guests were a living mosaic of worlds. Human soldiers in dress uniforms stood shoulder to shoulder with Kalari warriors in golden armor polished to mirror brightness. Crystalline diplomats chimed harmonies beside Martian botanists who'd brought terrariums of earth wildflowers as gifts. Even a few of the moth-like refugees hovered gently at the edges, their many eyes shimmering with quiet joy. Joran wore a simple uniform jacket stitched with Kalari runes along the cuffs, Vela's doing, and a single golden bead braided into his sun-bleached hair. Vela, radiant, had foregone full battle regalia for a gown woven from living starlight fiber, its hem trailing petals that bloomed and faded with each step she took. Her white hair flowed freely, woven only with tiny blossoms from the tree itself. She carried no weapon, only hope. There was no priest, no chancellor, no ancient text to recite. Instead, General Ryland, who'd become something of a grandfather figure to them both, stepped forward and said only, "You've already proven your vows in fire and silence. Today, you just make it official." And so they did. They clasped hands over the roots of the Elythian tree, and as their palms touched, the tree pulsed, a deep, resonant hum that spread through the ground like a heartbeat. From its highest branch, a single seed pod split open, releasing a shower of luminous spores that drifted down like snow, landing on the shoulders of every guest. Where they touched, old wounds tingled with warmth, forgotten dreams stirred, and for a moment, every being there, human, Kalari, refugee, stranger, felt the same truth. You are not alone. After the ceremony, they didn't ride off into a sunset. They stayed, built. With Lyra's help and Joran's stubborn pragmatism, they founded the Nexus Haven, a city that grew not from concrete and steel, but from symbiosis. Homes spiraled around living trees that purified the air. Schools taught in a dozen languages, including the soft hum of the crystalline scholars. Markets buzzed with merchants trading earth coffee beans for Kalari moon nectar, Martian algae cakes for desert-grown spice rice, laughter for lullabies. And in the heart of it all stood their home, a modest dome of fused sandglass and Elythian wood, with wide windows that faced both the rising suns and the stars beyond. It was there, 2 years later, that their first child was born. A girl with Joran's sun-warmed skin and Vela's opal eyes, her tiny fingers already curling around strands of white hair that weren't hers. They named her Alara, she who bridges. She wasn't the only child. Over the years, their home filled with laughter, scraped knees, bedtime stories told in mixed tongues, and the gentle chaos of a blended life. Some said it was impossible, a human and a Kalari, building a family across the gulf of biology and time. But biology, it turned out, was more generous than anyone expected. And time healed, connected, and bloomed when nurtured with kindness. Joran never pressed another wrong button. But sometimes, on quiet nights, he'd sit with Vela on their rooftop garden, watching Alara chase fireflies that glowed with the same hue as the Elythian tree, and he'd smile. "Remember that first cup of coffee?" he'd say. Vela would lean into him, her head on his shoulder, her golden armor long replaced by soft woven robes. "I remember thinking you were either mad or miraculous. And now?" he'd ask. "Now," she'd whisper, lacing her fingers through his. "I know you're both." Peace didn't come because the war ended. It came because they chose every day to plant something new in the ashes. Not just in the desert, but in each other. And as the twin suns rose once more over a world that no longer remembered borders, only neighbors, the Elythian tree sang softly in the wind. A lullaby for the future, and a promise that even the most accidental journeys can lead to the happiest of homes. Years flowed like desert winds, gentle, steady, full of life. Joran and Vela built not just a home, but a legacy. Their first child, Alara, was followed by twins, Kaelin and Sira, whose laughter echoed through the gardens of Nexus Haven. Then came little Rin, born during a meteor shower, with eyes that shimmered like starlight on violet sand. They raised their children beneath the Elythian tree, teaching them Earth lullabies and Kalari star chants, how to mend plasma rifles and plant Martian roses side by side. Their household buzzed with joy, mismatched socks, half-finished hover toys, and the scent of Vela's moonbloom tea mingling with Joran's infamous, almost edible pancakes. Neighbors dropped by with gifts, a crystal wind chime from the Ampari, a basket of glowing fruit from the desert orchards. The war became a story told at bedtime, not a shadow over their days. Joran grew gray at the temples. Vela's white hair lengthened, often braided with wildflowers by her youngest. They walked hand in hand through markets where human and alien children played tag across language barriers. On anniversaries, they returned to the spot where they'd first met in battle, now a quiet memorial garden, and kissed like newlyweds. Their kids grew strong, kind, and curious, some joining the peace vanguard, others becoming healers, teachers, even poets. Grandchildren arrived, with skin of every hue and eyes that held galaxies. The Elythian tree's branches spread wider, its roots weaving through the city like veins of peace. In old age, Joran and Vela sat on their porch most evenings, wrapped in the same blanket, watching the twin suns dip below a horizon no longer scarred by war. They never needed grand palaces or medals. Their greatest victory was this: a full house, full hearts, and the quiet certainty that love, not war, had rewritten their destiny. And so, surrounded by family, laughter, and the soft hum of 1,000 harmonious worlds, they lived, loved, and thrived, happily, deeply, completely, until their stars gently faded into the same sky that had once brought them together.